nanapua o Hawaii Pupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko I
Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Hello, Poca.
Yes, aloha.
Oh, it's strange. Any rate, the sound here is just sort of a hazy background. It doesn't interfere with
Yeah.
it. Doesn't make it any worse than it ever has been. But at any rate, commenting on your steps in colonization,
Yes.
I think we can bring it up to our present day, and perhaps if we looked at the steps in brainwashing, we could see that the same pattern is used, so that we can now recognize in our current society how brainwashing has been and is continuing, actually increasing, that brainwashing is increasing in our present society. And I think we could then see how this applies directly to us as individuals right now.
Let's examine the process of brainwashing. And first of all, I should explain that I'm not a specialist in it.
Well, I haven't looked them up either, Poca. I haven't had a chance, but the idea occurred to me that the same goal is in mind to do that to the individual mind, and therefore the steps in doing it are probably very similar, and we could recognize them in our own society, just as in advertising. The visual and auditory sounds that are made, especially the visual, during the very colorful and animated ads that we're subjected to, are definitely steps in brainwashing. Definitely, no question about it. So that would be an interesting study, which I guess I might be. It's interesting enough to me to do because I can see it.
Okay, great. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. So what I will expect from you...
Don't do that. No, stop. That'll end it. I won't do it. I refuse to live up to other people's expectations. No, absolutely not.
No,
the saying is down to other people's, but whatever. I'm not going to do it. But
so now I know how to stop you from doing something. Yeah, I know.
Without your expectations,
go ahead.
You'll be informed of it. You can rest assured. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right. Now let's talk about these steps. Okay. So I've spoken about 6 steps. The first being denial and withdrawal. The second, destruction and eradication. The third, denigration, belittlement, and insult. The fourth, surface accommodation or tokenism. The fifth, transformation. And the sixth, exploitation. And looking across the idea, or at least my concept of brainwashing, I think you're correct in that there are some equivalents across these different stages. And I will be waiting for you for further discussion on that topic, as I also try to examine these stages and look further into that point of brainwashing. How's that? Is that more palatable to you?
No, not at all. Because you're defining the whole thing. But at any rate, I certainly will do it because it interests me, and I think actually it's urgent, because if I can, or you can come up with examples of how that is in brainwashing, that we can see that's being done to us all the time. And we can then identify who's doing it. So that'll be very interesting. You can see I'm already convinced of it.
Yes.
All right, then thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for your call. Aloha.
Bye-bye.
Now, what I have just done is talked about the process of colonization, different stages, and I've identified 6 stages, and I must give credit to Professor Virgilio Enriquez, professor of psychology from the University of the Philippines. He had made these suggested 6 steps to me as we engage in our discussion, and we have played that discussion on an earlier program that I had produced, and that program was the what was it, Hawaiian? No, it was called A Second Glance, and it played on Hawaii Public Radio. All right. So again, let me go through those stages. Denial and withdrawal being the first stage, in which the colonizer denies the validity and even existence of culture of the indigenous people, accompanied by indigenous people themselves withdrawing from the practice and identification with that culture. If you take a look at David Marlowe and some of his writings, you will see part of that process of withdrawal from his own culture, or demeaning part of the Hawaiian culture, talking about the sort of the dark days that the Hawaiian people had been in before the Christians had come to Hawaii. That's an example of the withdrawal of those who now become educated within a different culture, begin to withdraw from their own culture. The second stage is destruction and eradication, consisting of direct physical destruction of elements of that culture. And you can find in many indigenous places this kind of practice taking place, whether it's with the Aztecs or the Filipinos or other indigenous people who go through this process. The third stage is denigration, belittlement, insult, in which any practice, observation, or acknowledgement of the traditional culture is treated with contempt and even criminality. Here, even symbols of evil must be imported by the colonizer in order to gain legitimacy, such as the importation of a Dracula or other representatives of evil into indigenous communities, while alluding to indigenous representatives of evil as ignorant superstitions. The fourth is surface accommodation or tokenism. Whenever remnants of a culture survives, they are merely accommodated in an atmosphere of folklorism, of, quote, showing respect to the old folks and to tradition. The fifth stage is called transformation. The cultural practice is transformed into the culture of the dominating society. For instance, a Christian church may use an indigenous person and incorporate some indigenous religious terms and practices within the Christian expression of religion. And finally, exploitation. The final stage, where the cultural practice of the indigenous people is sought for its commercial, artistic, or political value. So those are the stages of colonization. How it now then moves to a process of decolonization. It will be a subject for a different program, and we'll get into that sometimes in the future. Not sure when. If you would like to call and share an opinion, telephone number is 524-1080. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Hi, Polka.
Yes,
Very
hi.
interesting. Tell me about that. Maybe I can hang up and listen, but isn't it the reason why they brought in people from from China and Japan and Philippines to work on the plantations, because they couldn't get the Hawaiian people to. I mean, the Hawaiian people, even though they tried to convince them, that they were not convinced that they couldn't. That they had to work from sunrise to sunset in the hot sun, chopping down sugarcane and picking pineapples and that kind of stuff. And I mean, because there was plenty of the Hawaiian people here that could partake in that labor, but they pretty much just looked at that as very stupid to spend your whole life doing that without any even kind of quality of life, you know. And anyway, I'll listen to your comments about there. But of course, that was one of the big exploitations here when they exploited other peoples. They brought them in and then they exploited them, you know. Yeah. And of course they exploited the natives too, every which way. So.
Okay. All right. You want to hang up or?
Yeah, I'll just hang up and listen to it.
All right. Thanks for your call. I'll answer your question as much as I can. Aloha.
Okay.
And so the bringing in of laborers to work on the sugar plantations or the pineapple plantations, how does that fit within the processes of colonization? In the Hawaii case, was it because the Hawaiians would not work for the plantations, or was it for another reason? I think the answer is that there were a number of influences why laborers were brought in from other places. The principal reason being that they need laborers. But why not pick on the Hawaiian population? And the Hawaiian population, there were two reasons why they were not effective for the laboring population for sugar and pineapple, for the what do you call it, the agricultural corporations. One, you simply didn't have enough native people to fill the need of the plantations, because the population numbers had already dwindled, and you didn't have like 1 million natives who you could pick from. At a particular point in time, you had as little as 40,000 of the total Hawaii population. The second is that there was this element of new, what do you call it, a new kind of economy coming into Hawaii, that the indigenous people had a very difficult time adjusting or becoming acculturated to. It's very similar to that process of colonization as it comes in. Usually a person in his or her own homeland do not fully appreciate the changes that are occurring in terms of the experiences that are going on in other places that are now being colonized or being taken over. So the indigenous person can see some of the changes, but for another population that comes in from another land and come to a new country, they are ready for the shock of cultural changes. They come with the expectation of adapting or adopting a different cultural practice, so that their familiarity or their readiness to engage in this new way of life is at a more advanced stage than the native people, who will hearken back to the days of a particular practice or a particular behavior, and so you have that general resistance to the adoption of this new change in life. The second thing is that the Hawaiians, the native people of Hawaii, were not familiar with, from a historical, cultural base, the new economy that was coming in. The whole idea of trading items and maximizing a profit, the capitalist approach to a new economy, was all new to the Hawaiians. In China, in Japan, and probably in many other areas, you had that sort of the merchant class, a class of people who were familiar with buying here, selling there, buying for this amount, selling at a higher amount, and the rest. The Hawaiians were more in a bartering or a trading or a kokua system of giving and taking as was necessary and appropriate. So it wasn't something that really fell into the mercantile acceptance of what economics is supposed to be. So when you bring in this new theory, the people themselves are not ready to fully appreciate or understand the underlying principles behind this theory. And they cannot understand it from a long historical experience, as compared to others who come in and are willing to sell their labor and understand what that trade-off is all about. even among the Japanese and many of the Chinese, they came with a different concept of the sale of labor, with the idea oftentimes of returning back to that place. So after the contract was over, then you can get off of the plantations, but instead at times finding that the plantation, the obligation to the plantation was so heavy that you could not really release yourself, and so you were becoming indentured slaves in that process, and that was not foreseen by many of the people who came in. But it's an interesting question. It's a very important subject that we can take a look at, and we'll take more of your telephone calls. Go to our first caller. Aloha, caller. Welcome to the program. Oh, I'm sorry, caller. Here you go. Could you speak up, please?
Oh, it's me again.
Yes, hello again.
I Googled something, and I think it's a good beginning.
Okay.
The title is Colonizing and Decolonizing Minds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Marcello, Marcelo, Daskal, that's D as in down, Ascal. Well, if I might take a few minutes, I'll go as quickly as I can to read the first paragraph, which is, quote, whereas the most visible forms of political colonialism have for the most part disappeared from the planet by the end of the millennium, several of its consequences remain with us. Criticism of colonialism, accordingly, has shifted its focus to its more subtle and lasting manifestations. Prominent among these are the varieties of what came to be known as the colonization of the mind. So I think that's a very good beginning. Mm-hmm. And if we read down, I'll read the sentence that brought me to a halt. And it is talking about how this is achieved, and he goes on to say, therefore, colonization of the mind may take place through transmission of mental habits and contents by means of social systems other than the colonial structure. For example, via the family. Mm-hmm. That's it. I don't have to go any further. Okay. But you can go down and say traditions, religion, science, language, the whole thing that has made different cultures in which one group dominates the other, and I don't think there are any out there that doesn't occur on some level. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good beginning. Yes, now I expect responses quickly.
Response from me quickly.
Oh yes, those are the conditions you set.
Okay, here's a response, and I don't know when this article was printed, but back in the 1970s, in the mid to perhaps late 70s, this discussion was occurring, and in fact, there had been a magazine or two with the idea of the decolonization of the mind, and I'm not sure if it was this psychologist or what do you call it? I'm not sure what his profession is, or if it was this writer. At that time, in 1977, we came out with the following statement said in a prayer, and it started in the Hawaiian language, O Keakua. Return to us our face. Give us the strength to rip this American mask from our flesh. Give us the strength to reclaim what is ours, our sovereignty. Let us be Hawaiians in our own lands. So you had the picture of a Hawaiian face with the attempt to pull a mask, a white mask off, and behind that white mask was a native Hawaiian face, which was in line with what you are precisely talking about. The decolonization of the mind had to occur in order to overcome the colonization, which then brings us to the next 5 stages of decolonization, where we'll go in our next discussion. So I'm glad that you brought this up, because it makes a nice segue from the movement of colonization and that process, and then looking at decolonization as a methodical process, not simply leaving the community and then finally you're decolonized, but it's really how do you change or return the mindset or the ability to dream again as an indigenous people or as a people yourself, rather than merely mimicking the ways of the colonizer and thinking that you are decolonized.
Yes, you really have to start from the inside out, and that's extremely difficult to do, as most of us who have been working on it know. I mean, I'm still, as I told you before, gnawing my way out. It takes many, many years, and hopefully we can achieve some of it with any kind of luck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much for doing that immediate research.
Yes.
Wow.
It's going to be very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. Aloha. And let's go to our next caller. Again, the telephone number here is 524-1080. Aloha caller. Welcome to the program.
Hey, aloha.
Aloha.
This is an uncolonized mind reporting from Waimanalo.
At least you think you're uncolonized.
Right.
But good. It's a good start. It's a good start.
Coming in loud and blur.
Thank you, Filippo.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, you know the thing about it, a pickle was not always a pickle. A pickle started off as a cucumber.
Okay.
Hawaiians think that they always been a pickle.
Not being in the pickle, but they had always been a pickle from the beginning.
You know what I mean?
Some Hawaiians, okay?
And you had mentioned about David, I think, called talking about the not having the Hawaiians for laborers. Yeah.
Yes.
When you part of assimilation. The best slave is a slave that doesn't know that they are a slave. Yeah, and when you have when you take over a country, and all of a sudden you end up with all this land, and then if you're going to use the native people to work the land, they're going to figure out, hey, how come these Kaolis get all this land? What's going on? But if you keep them off the land, let them play at the beach and do the hukilaos and pound poi.
Don't call attention.
Hula.
Don't call attention to the fact that you got their land.
They don't know what's going on. And by the time they do, it's too late. So it's so easy. Then, of course, you bring in immigrant people, Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, that are so willing, to come just for a better life and attempt to have a better life. They'll take anything,
Yeah.
It's just like what's the problem of the borders in Mexico and the United States of today. Those people are, they're so desperate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they work right into the hands of the colonizers.
You're not going to give your overseer any static. Whereas if you told a Hawaiian, I need 10,000 Hawaiians, and when your population is only 40,000, oh boy, you're asking for problems. I mean, so that's why that's why they brought in the immigrants.
Very interesting point. Yeah.
And I just wanted to. I was at a rally today on Save Farmlands. Yeah.
Well, before you go to that, because I suspect you're going to move to a different subject, let me respond to this idea of when indigenous people are used as laborers on land that they may remember the history, or at least the culture is still inside of them, and their treatment of the land is contrary to what the more, quote, modernized use of the land is, then you are more likely to have trouble with the indigenous laborers. Let me give you an example. In this area now known and had always been known as Kalai Loa, Kapolei, also known as Fort Barrett, where they had a military fort, right in the back. That whole area used to be sugar lands.
Yeah, certainly.
Before that, that was a traditional Hawaiian village, and it was known as a place of kamapua'a. And that was where the grandmother had lived, and kamapua'a would walk through those areas, as well as very well known in the Waianae area.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Now, the laborers who were Filipino or Japanese laborers on the sugar plantation, they would hear voices, they would hear horses in the night, they would hear so many things that were, quote, supernatural. And so they would talk about these things, and but not having the earlier connection and relationship of Kamupua'a. The Hawaiians had known about this place that carried with it that history and that culture. So to take a Hawaiian and make him a laborer on this sacred land, on this special land, you're going to get a different kind of reaction and different, what do you call it, crowd control or labor management, labor relationship.
Oh, sure. They're not good. They're in the sacred areas, basically, to Mana, they don't go into the areas.
Yeah, so that's another reason why the use of indigenous labor in a place taken over may not be the best. So that's just one of the elements. So I'm sorry for interrupting. You were going.
No. It's basically because you bring immigrant people, they're not ma'a to the lands, huh? Okay, so they don't hold anything sacred.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, and you can get them to do things.
The native people, basically, whatever they do this, whether it was Puerto Rico, Cuba, wherever, you keep them off the land because they know that they're going to have problems with them,
Yeah.
The land is sacred. But anyway, this other stuff, basically, I'll call you tomorrow morning. I know you get a lot of people want to talk to you.
No, go ahead. No one wants to talk to me right now, right? At least.
Well, anyway, this Save the Oil Lands, yeah?
Yes.
That Keone Dudley and the people, yeah?
Right.
We had a beautiful program today. Unfortunately, the turnout wasn't that good, yeah?
I see.
Maybe 300, yeah? We had good music, we had good programs, good displays and what have you, yeah?
Yeah.
But they're only talking about the 1,500 acres that Ho'opili is trying to fool the people with, yeah? As being the agriculture park, yeah?
Yeah.
You cannot have an agriculture park in the middle of a residential area.
It's part of that tokenism. You remember that stages? One of which is tokenism. That's exactly what Ho'opili is doing. They are converting thousands of acres from agriculture to residential, and then they are grabbing maybe 100 or even less than that acres and say, oh, we're going to have an agricultural park, which is a tokenism, as if, and then they buy in or they buy out, who's that president of the Farm Bureau, and use him as a puppet to be the spokesman for their Ho'opili project.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii Kupa'a mahope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala anunu me ka paka Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave Koku ana honoa o Pilani Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano Pa'apu me ke oni o ka kuhi he